So I'm going to just go ahead and jump in and read bios. Chen Chen is the author of When I Grow Up, I Want to Be a List of Further Possibilities, one of the best titles ever, which was longlisted for the National Book Award and won the Tom Gunn Award, among other honors, including the Writers League of Texas Book Award for Poetry. Last summer, Biodax Books published the UK edition. He is also the author of 4 chapbooks, most recently Gesundheit with Sam Herschel-Wein and out from Glass Poetry Press. His work appears in many publications, including Poetry, Plowshares, Poem a Day, and the Best American Poetry 2015 and 2019. He has received a Pushcart Prize and fellowships from Kundiman and the National Endowment for the Arts. He holds an MFA from Syracuse and a PhD from Texas Tech University. He teaches at Brandeis University as the Jacob Ziskin Poet in Residence and co-runs the journal Underblong. He lives in Waltham, Massachusetts with his partner and their pug, Mr. Rupert Giles, which makes me want to talk to you about Buffy the Vampire Slayer now for the rest of the hour. So please welcome in the chat box, Chen Chen. Thank you for being here. I don't know if you guys have a chat box, I'll be honest with you. Okay, Elizabeth McCracken is the author of 6 books. Here's Your Hat, What's Your Hurry, The Giant's House, Niagara Falls All Over Again, an exact replica of a figment of my imagination, Thunderstruck and Other Stories, which was also a Writers League of Texas Book Award winner, and the wonderful, wonderful most recent novel, Bolaway. She's received grants and fellowships from the Guggenheim Foundation, the National Endowment for the Arts, the Liguria Study Center, the American Academy in Berlin, the Fine Arts Work Center in Provincetown, and the Radcliffe Institute for Advanced Study. Thunderstruck and Other Stories won the 2015 Story Prize. You can find her rather often, entirely too often, really, on Twitter. She's taught creative writing at Western Michigan University, the University of Oregon, the University of Houston, and the University of Iowa Writers Workshop. She holds the James A. Michener Chair in Fiction at the University of Texas, Austin, and boy, are her arms tired. Please welcome Elizabeth McCracken. And last but not least, Kathy Valentine's memoir, All I Ever Wanted, was published in March 2020. She's been a working musician and songwriter for over 40 years, ever since she started her first band at age 16 in her hometown of Austin. After moving to Los Angeles, Kathy joined a band that would go on to make music history. Perhaps you've heard of it, the Go-Go's. In this group, Kathy wrote or co-wrote some of the band's most renowned tunes, including the hits Vacation and Head Over Heels. She returned to Austin in 2006 and began finding new opportunities as a public speaker, spokesperson, producer, and mentor. And again, her new memoir just came out and it is wonderful. So please welcome Kathy Valentine. What a cool group of people we have assembled. So we started this whole conference with a panel yesterday morning that was called Why We Write. And the idea was that we wanted to circle back to that again at the end and just hear as many times and as often as we could from really cool writers, a little bit more about what drives them. And yesterday's panel, I started with a couple of quotes, one from Toni Morrison and one from Zadie Smith. And this one, I'm gonna start with another couple quotes. I just knew there were stories I wanted to tell, is what Octavia Butler said. I'm sure many people have actually said that, but we love Octavia Butler. And then Cormac McCarthy, I don't know why I've started writing. I don't know why anybody does it. Maybe they're bored or failures at something else. Thanks, Cormac McCarthy. So I just wanted to jump in with the question that is the most obvious, and that is for each of you in turn, and I'll do this in order of how I introduced you. So starting with you, Chen, why do you write?
Oh my God, okay. Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me. Thanks for inviting me, Becca. I'm really honored to be on this panel and to help close out this amazing event. So I did prepare some notes because I knew otherwise I'd just completely stumble around. So I'll try to, just keep this brief. But yeah, I write for a variety of reasons. They're constantly shifting and evolving. The changes have to do with my growth as a writer, as well as a person, and with what's going on where I'm living and in the larger world. So just as a quick example, I may have been interested in writing since I was really little, like since second grade. And I would create these like skits basically on the playground during recess and recruit my friends to play out different parts. And that grew into pretty much just really bad, really terrible fan fiction. Like it was a combination of Buffy the Vampire Slayer, Star Wars, Alias, if anyone remembers that show. So it's basically like
yeah,
spies who sometimes go to outer space to do espionage and magic. And so it started out as a way to keep myself entertained, to entertain my friends. I would write like a chapter at a time and, you know, give it to my friends to read. And then really starting in high school, I turned to poetry when I needed an outlet for more internal concerns. Stuff having to do with, you know, figuring out my sexuality, what was going on with my family, what I couldn't say out loud yet, what I couldn't share with friends immediately or in as much depth. So poetry really grew out of that. And I continue to write to figure out what it is I'm really thinking and feeling. I often don't quite know until I start putting it into writing. So to explore the full range of my thoughts and emotions, to get more precise about what those involve, not just sadness, but the kind of sadness I felt on a specific day because of my personal history, because of the place I inhabit and collective histories. And I'm especially interested in how joy is connected to sorrow, how these two are in fact a spectrum. I also write to reimagine my relationship to language, in particular the English language, which is the only language I'm really fluent in, though recently I've been trying to work with some Mandarin Chinese too. So in poetry, I'm really interested in the sound, the music of the line, the sentence, as well as playing with, you know, multiple meanings of words. And then I also write to question and speak back to dominant narratives, like the coming out narrative, which tends to resolve very quickly in either tragedy or triumph. So a lot of my work looks at what happens when coming out is a continual process, cyclical, one that changes familial relationships over years and leads to redefining family and kinship. The building of queer kinship, the vitality and resourcefulness and beauty of queer friendships, and how race, as a queer person of color, is inextricable from how I imagine and experience my sexuality. So those are just some reasons. But as I said, you know, there are many and they change depending on what's going on in my life and the particular poem or chapbook project or book project that I'm working on.
yeah. Yeah, wow. I mean, just, you know, just some of them, but so well put and so, you know, thoughtful. And I really appreciate you sharing that. Thank you. Elizabeth McCracken, what do you write?
Gosh, my answer is going to be worse because not only did I not take notes, but you asked the question and I thought, what? Despite it being the actual title of the panel.
I'm so shocked that she's asking about this.
Very invasive. I'm thrilled to be here with you, Becca, and with Kathy and Chen. And I love the Writers League. I'm going to try to answer your question as honestly as possible. And to some extent, the answer is I don't know. I probably agree a bit with Cormac McCarthy in that I have no other talents. And that's one of the reasons why I write. I'm a show off, and it is one of the only things that I do well enough to show off at. And even then, I don't do it that well all the time. But I also write, I think, lifelong. And I was a kid who always wrote. And I wrote poetry and I wrote some plays, but I made other kids put them on. And I've been thinking about this a lot lately, that I write because it is one of the ways in which I can turn off the noise of the world. And that when I'm actually putting sentences together. And for me, the greatest pleasure in writing comes sentence to sentence. I like being able to step back and seeing something larger, but I always return to the sentence. When I am doing that and it's going well, it doesn't feel profound, but it feels all encompassing in a way that is deeply pleasurable. And it really is one of the only things that I can do in these days in which I don't hear the noise of the outside world as a sort of a low, menacing rumble, since the outside world feels, quite menacing these days. And I honestly think I wish that I did it for nobler reasons. But I do it because it's like the nicest compliment I ever got, as I once gave a reading in California that almost nobody showed up to. But one person afterwards said that dreaded sentence. This is more of a comment than a question. But the comment was that her daughter had this horrible stuffed animal that was ugly and dirty and strange. Maybe she didn't say ugly, but it was dirty and strange. And it had a music box at the heart of it that played a beautiful song. And she said, and that's what your writing means to me. And it was a compliment that made a huge amount to me. And I actually think that's what writing is to me. It's this weird thing that I've been carrying around too long. It's very soiled, but if I listen closely, I could hear that song that's at the heart of it.
Wow. Thank you. I love that. I love it. Kathy, speaking of songs, so why do you write, Kathy? Because you have written, obviously in a couple different forms and as well. And so what drives you? Why is writing an expression that you want to pursue and have pursued?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. And I'm so feel very honored to be in the presence of such accomplished writers, all of you, everybody. And I have to say, I'm an only child. Books were my company and my friends from the time I could read, just devoured books, wrote a lot of stories. I was a fantasy addict. So even when I wasn't writing on the page, I was writing in my head. And when I discovered music, it wasn't very long before, when you're a new musician, it can be kind of boring learning some just not knowing how to play very well. So I immediately started writing songs. And I hadn't been playing very long before I realized that songwriting was my best friend as much as books were. And it became the one place where I could process everything that was going on internally and externally and kind of figure out what I felt and what I thought. It took a very long time before it occurred to me that somebody else might be interested or have find a relationship with what my external things were. And that's when the connection part of it came for me as a songwriter. The connection, I've always tried really hard to write songs in a way that people could relate it to themselves, without getting too specific. To me, that was the artistry and the craft behind a song. And I started wanting to write more outside of the song genre, and being so well read and reading so much classic literature and being a perfectionist and all those horrible things, it actually stopped me for the longest time because I thought I'll never be as good as my favorite writers. And I was actually quite afraid. And most of my writing was confined to school, essays and creative writing classes. When I finally got the courage to do a memoir, a large part of it was like, well, I'm not competing with all the other writers with my memoir. This is my story. And I felt that I could do it. And it has been and continues to be, even this process of the aftermath of writing the book has been the cheapest therapy I've ever had in my life. And I still realize, just talking about my book and doing panels like this and talking to writers and people, what what this process is for me. And I agree so much with Chen and Elizabeth that, you know, it turns this off. You know, I grow as a person, as a 61-year-old woman. I am still struggling with some of the same stuff that I feel like holds me back and gets in my way. And I feel like writing has helped me get a little kind of incrementally get a little closer to kind of sorting through some of the things I want to sort through. I, the pleasure of bringing the artistry to writing in prose, of knowing that, just realizing, okay, it's all, I know how to do this. I know how to figure out what I want to leave in and what I want to take out. And being able to transfer what I'd learned as a songwriter and as an artist and put it into my writing was a wonderful pleasure, because it just makes, I don't know, I felt accomplished. And I don't think we ever get tired of that feeling of feeling accomplished. And, you know, my hat's off to, I mean, God, I hope I can do it again. I'm dying to write more and write more books, because that feeling of just creating something for nothing with that, the amount of focus and discipline, it's so much different to like day after day. And I'm really proud and really excited. And it's a nice way to feel at my age, to feel excited and proud and challenged and like I can't wait to do it again. So that's part of it. But there's a lot of other reasons too.
Well, and it feels like a natural partnership, right? Writing and music. And it seems like even, you know, when I think of poetry, Chen, and I think of how we talk about sort of how, you know, lyrical, or not in the technical term, but more, you know, the beauty of the words being spoken aloud and the rhythm and all of that, they are really intertwined. I think that sort of what we love about music and what our ear and our hearts love about great writing. And so I'm going to come back to you, Chen, because I would love to hear a little bit from you about poetry and kind of how that form became the form. I know you talked about coming to poetry, but can you talk a little bit more about why that has sort of felt like the right place for you to express yourself?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm still figuring that out myself. I was gonna say too that, yeah, similar to Elizabeth, I feel like I have no other significant talents. And I have longed for other talents as well. And music has actually been one of them. I mean, I took piano lessons for a really long time. I was in orchestra, but I didn't really have much natural inclination. And I don't know if I have that much natural talent at it, but it is something that I would like to return to one day. And I tend to be drawn to musicians as well, like my partner is a musician. And actually, yeah, the other like longest relationship that I've had was also with a guy in a band. Yeah, I think I have some of that music envy, but I channel that as much as I can into the poetry through thinking about rhythm and like the oral tradition. Poetry is really important to me. I participated in like a lot of open mics and was friends with people at my college's slam collective. I never fully got into slam because I think I was afraid to compete and have my performance like ranked, but it was a really formative experience all the same to get up in front of people and perform a poem, recite it, or even just read it. But try to do so in the most effective way. And that's something that I still have my students do every semester with the poetry workshop that I teach, to have to memorize and recite a poem. Because I think it's really important to have that embodied experience of the art and to have that really intense inhabiting of the words, you know, getting the words into your body, into your mind, into your heart, and to feel the texture and quality of them, right, as they're coming out of your mouth and in front of people. So
is that a part
yeah.
of, can I ask, is that a part of your revision process too? Are you reading aloud and that's sort of helping you as you're writing poetry?
Yeah, definitely. I read out loud a lot as I'm working. These days, usually not initially, because I think there is also a danger where you can kind of like lull yourself. Like you can read it very beautifully, but on the page, it might be doing something else. But that's always, yeah, a part of my process at some stage. Yeah, in revision, I have to hear what the words are doing together, for sure.
And then just before I move past you, I want to ask you a question that I want to ask everybody. And I think sometimes poets, or I probably do this, think of poets as, you know, the poets are going to save the world. The poets are the ones who are putting truth into these beautiful small pieces of, you know, art and magic. And that leads me to, and of course that's ridiculous, but also not fair to poets. But I would say, what do you feel is your responsibility as a writer? As a writer, what kind of responsibility do you carry?
Yeah, I mean, I don't subscribe to the belief that poets are going to save the world. I mean, I think it's more like poets along with everyone else, because I think it takes a lot of collective action, you know, as we're seeing now, you know, with protests and movement work right now, and direct action. Yeah, I don't think poetry in itself is enough. And I think also, you know, there are terrible poems, you know, there are racist poems, there are bigoted poems. And so I don't think there's anything inherently pure or better about the art. But I think, or I hope that the art does present this challenge or this opportunity to rethink. And as I said earlier, particularly your relationship to language, you know, how language itself can lead to maintaining the status quo, maintaining systems of power, but also the possibilities within language to break that down, to start to dismantle it, to start to reimagine other ways of being with one another. And so that part of it makes me hopeful. But I think as individuals, like we have to recognize the opportunity that is there in the art.
So Elizabeth, and thank you, that's a great, great way to put it. Elizabeth, how do you feel about that idea of the responsibility of a writer? How does that work into or factor into your life as a writer?
I was really hoping the poets were going to save the world.
There's still hope.
You know, and partly because I don't, you know, for me, reading poetry is where I always go at not only at the most difficult times of my life, but also at the most difficult times of my life. And I think writers, I'm of two minds with the question about what the responsibility of writers are. I also completely agree with Chen that we have responsibilities as human beings that are entirely separate from our responsibilities as writers. I do think that, and now I'm just going to repeat some of the things that Chen said because I think he put them so well. I do think that writing is a way to think differently, and that reading is also a way to think differently, and that and I'll just talk about fiction for the moment, since that's what I write, that I think that allowing readers to see human beings on the page that they don't encounter in other places in their life, or they do encounter in other places in their life, but not to that depth, is an incredibly useful and important thing. And I also, you know, it's hard not to notice that since the death of George Floyd, people are rushing to read. They're rushing to books. And although maybe some of them are rushing a little too much to books, hoping that they'll solve all of their problems and cure all of the bad habits of their own thinking, back to their earliest childhood, it is still really cheering to me that that people know that books can help you think in ways that watching something cannot help you. At the same time, as a writing teacher, I sometimes say to my students who want to know what their jobs are as writers, that the only jobs that any writer has are the ones they want to assign to themselves or take on for themselves, that it's important that they don't write things that they don't believe in because they think there's some obscure purpose that it will have for somebody else. And I think the most useful and meaningful work is the stuff that is written for a writer's own purposes. And that if you're a writer and you're true to yourself and you don't let yourself off the hook in what you're writing, that work is going to be much more useful to a reader than something that was written from the point of view of responsibility would ever be.
Yeah, thank you. I know that is the sort of first responsibility, right? To be true to yourself as a writer, to find the way that you are going to express yourself that is honest to yourself, and then you know, maybe the next thing comes too. Kathy, what do you think of as a responsibility when it comes to writing? Oh, you might be muted. I think you're muted. Did we lose your microphone?
No, sorry.
There you are.
There's a siren here, or there was. Yeah, I don't know if I thought about that question ever. And I mean, as somebody that's a very, new writer, as a memoirist, my responsibility was to be truthful and honest and unafraid and fearless and just and that's what I did. It didn't occur to me till after it was done and it was going to come out that I started going, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God, everyone's going to know. So at the time I was just making sure that I was keeping with my deadline and doing that, but as a reader and as someone that has written short stories and other things, I'd have to go with what Elizabeth said, and just because I think the responsibility is to finish and see it through and do it for yourself, because I don't see how you're going to connect or have meaning or connect with somebody else if it's not authentic to what that impulse or that inspiration, that pull that made you want to sit down day after day and do it. So I don't know, not the best answer, but
no, it's a great answer. And it made me realize too, that there's also a lot of pressure that is placed on, I think, folks who are writing memoir about what that, again, to use the word responsibility, but not to use it so much that you guys are sick of hearing it. But when you're writing your story, you're also writing, other people are coming in and out of your story. And I wonder, what that was like for you to sort of think about being true to yourself as a writer, telling your story, but then knowing that also you were going to be talking about other people's stories too.
Well, I was very lucky because I had a very clear sense that I had a story and I had a story arc, and my protagonist had a journey, and it was all about that. That's what I kept in focus. So I didn't think other people's stories were mine to tell, and so I tended to not struggle too much with that. I mean, I was just very focused on making sure that it was mine. And, I checked the person that was going to have the most at risk was my mom. And I checked with her all the time, because I knew that the quality or the end result wasn't contingent on any one thing. And if any one thing made somebody uncomfortable, I could pseudonym them or change it or omit it. I knew that the overall story was really strong and not dependent on, so I wasn't going to do anything that somebody didn't want. So my mom was the one I was most worried about.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was, I think my responsibility was to not try to gloss over or sugarcoat, or, you know, I tried to keep thinking blood on the page without being a gaping wound.
That's a great way to put it. It's a great way to put it. So I want to hop back to something that Elizabeth said, which was just in the midst of saying other wonderful things you mentioned, you know, when you're writing, when the writing's going well. And I guess that caught my ear because I was thinking, what does when the writing's going well mean to Elizabeth McCracken? Because I know what the writing going well for me means, and that's just that like words are appearing on a page. Yay. But I'm just curious for each of you, but I'll start with you, Elizabeth, you know, why we write, but then also why we keep going, and how you recognize what, you know, when something's working, and what does that even mean?
Yeah. To some extent, it is words appearing on the page, that I'm not somebody who I spend a lot of time not writing and being unhappy about it, and sitting down and having writing going badly. But I'm not one of those people who slaves over sentences. I sometimes hear writers talk about, you know, I spent 5 hours on 3 sentences, and I think, oh my God, I don't have the heart to do that. That sounds terrible. Why would you do that? And for me, when writing is going well, there is a certain ease with it, but it also, I think, much more, it's not just the time that I'm spending at the keyboard and writing that makes it feel like it's going well. It's when I keep thinking about the piece that I'm working on, or the world that I'm trying to create, when it is occupying me, not just when I'm typing sentence to sentence, but, you know, sort of all the time. I'm one of those people, I teach at UT, but I don't get a ton of writing done during the semester. I do most of my writing during breaks and leaves and that sort of thing. And that's partially because it allows me to spend time just sort of wool gathering about what I'm working on. And feeling, you know, feeling like even if I don't know what I'm doing, that things feel full of possibility.
Well, and sticking with you for a second, because I think this will be probably a perfect second part to this question, I think, is how do you get unstuck? So do you have those moments where, and it sounds like you have a pretty structured year, in that if you're in the middle of a semester, you're probably not doing a lot of writing, and so perhaps when you're not in the middle of a semester, you have it's a little bit more freed up for the writing to come. But when you're stuck, when you want those words appearing on the page but they're not, do you have any sort of, does that happen to you? And if it does, do you have any tips for what might help the folks who are listening?
For me, the cure is always reading. And I was actually stuck on something last week, and I started reading The Vanishing Half by Britt Bennett, which had come in the mail and is so amazing and exciting. And somehow being excited about the way plot was unfolding in this book sort of has spilled over into what I'm working. And for me, that's really the only thing. I work best in my campus office surrounded by my own books. I read poetry a lot when I'm stuck as well, that there's something about being able to stay on one page or a couple of pages and being able to read in not just in a linear way, but back up into the side. And yeah, for me, that's, and I also revise by reading aloud a lot. And that's a way for me to sort of enter the work in another way.
Mm-hmm. Chen, how about you? Sort of going back to that idea of when it's going well, how you know it's going well. And then also when it's not going well, or when you're just like the muse isn't there for you, how you get unstuck.
Yeah, so first I wanted to make sure to mention, because this thought came up when you're talking about responsibility. There's this great conversation between, I'll put the name of the poet in the chat box, Nikki Finney, is in conversation with this other poet, Araceli Skirmay. You can find it on YouTube if you just like search Nikki Finney on YouTube. And she's asked about responsibility as a writer, and she says this great thing, which is that she hates the word role model, or she finds it like icky. And she's like, I don't want to be a role model, but I want to be who I say I am, being who I say I am. And she said, like, that's enough for me. And the more that I think about it, actually, the more complicated that seems, because do you know yourself enough to the degree that you are who you say you are? But I just think that's a great sort of example to go off of. But back to your question, I mean, one, it has to sound good. So back to the reading out loud, sort of testing it out loud. The other big thing is I need to be surprised. I need to have discovered something in the process of writing that I couldn't have anticipated before the writing happened. So not something from a preconceived idea of what the piece was going to be, or sort of what lesson I would learn from it, but a discovery of some kind. And that can be something as small as, oh, like a line of poetry can function in this way. So it can be like a really nerdy kind of craft thing that happens. But the most satisfying is when there's some kind of emotional surprise to the work, where I realize, oh, like I'm thinking about forgiveness in this way, or I'm thinking about love in a different way, or I'm thinking about friendship in a very different way. So that's part of what keeps me coming back to writing too, is, oh, I might be really surprised by what happens in it. And then when I'm feeling stuck, definitely reading is a cure, putting it that way. Also, because I guess thinking about rhythm, going on long walks, not sitting in front of my screen, but doing some kind of like physical activity that allows me to think in a different way, or just not think for a while, and not be looking at writing. And then also having trusted readers, first readers, who'll take a look at something and get me out of my own head. And frequently just talking through what's happening in the piece, or how someone else is seeing it, yeah, just opens it up.
Yeah, thank you. I know walks are key, huh? I think getting for a lot of folks, and I've heard a lot of writers say that it's such a great way to just let your mind wander at the same time that you're wandering and get out of that space. Kathy, what about you in terms of just knowing that it's going well, or when the muse isn't coming to you, getting unstuck?
I found, and I know I'm not the only one, because there's actually like little memes on the internet that say this, but I found myself going through that thing a lot of like, oh my God, I'm a genius, I'm brilliant. And then, oh my God, I'm a lame amateur. Oh my God, I suck. And so I had a lot of that kind of all over the place. So I have to admit that it felt very good when I was in that place of I'm a brilliant genius. I lived for those times, as few and far between as they were. But
and what was happening though? Let me ask you, like, what was happening in that moment? Were you responding emotionally to something you just written? Were you, had you just, I think when Chen said he discovers something, and that's sort of one way that he knows it's going well. Can you think of what those things are?
Yeah, you just draw on everything. Like I have journaled my whole life, never consistently. But for, weeks, months at a time for my whole life. And, I can look back at the journals and find stuff still. I have every notebook I've ever written songs in, and knowing that in the spewing that there's value. And it's like, it kind of taught me to trust just trust that. And if I didn't write for a long time, that it's also about balance. Like sometimes I needed that to fill up or whatever, and just fill up in life and trust. And so much of the time, you know, when I'm kind of beating myself over the head because I haven't sat down, and then I sit down maybe so much later and I do something that I'm really happy with. And all of a sudden I'm like, okay, you know, this wouldn't have come out maybe if I'd done it a week ago. So I just started trusting the, and I don't want to say the artistry, but just trusting that the process is there. And sometimes you just have to sit down and do it. My biggest thing was to just be aware and learn. I mean, I spent 7 months writing 3 chapters because of my perfectionism, and realize you can't do this. You're never going to finish. And when I journal, I don't sit there and agonize over every sentence. I'm a spewer. And some of that stuff is so raw and visceral that it can make me cry about something from decades ago. So I just kind of put that knowledge with, like, you can't write like this, and it's okay to spew. And I'm also a big believer in incremental progress. You know, I didn't need to carve out and do this for 4 hours. If I could just sit down and do 1 or 2 lines, and that was it, that was okay with me. I really believe in incremental progress. I don't have the kind of structure. I've been a musician too long. I can't structure my life, you know, and I just had to grab 20 minutes here or 30 minutes here, sometimes a few hours, no set time, no set thing. And incrementally, it all started coming together. So when I was stuck, it's that balance of like, okay, am I being lazy or am I filling up? You know, always finding the balance and the self-awareness and honesty. But,
I like
you know,
that.
I hope that it's different now. I hope the next book will be like, I won't have to go through all that stuff, but probably I will.
I'm going to remember that later, that idea of, am I being lazy or am I filling up? Because then I'm going to be able to just say to myself, oh no, I'm filling up. I'm just filling up. I'm not being lazy. I'm just waiting until I'm ready. That's really great. And I'm glad you're saying also that, you know, I feel that oftentimes, we hear you have to write every day, you have to do this, you have to do this, you have to do this to be a writer. But, you know, part of the reason why we want to talk to so many of you and hear these conversations is that every writer's different and you have to find what's right for you, right?
Yeah, and I was a researchaholic, and I read a lot of books like how writers did it. That's what I do. I'm like, okay, I'm going to learn how to do this. And ultimately, yeah, it's what you got to do is finish, right? That's what you have to do. However you do it.
So I guess then I'm going to ask one last question, which feels appropriate because we are almost finished with this unconference. And that is, when you're working on a project, and Chen, I'm going to go back to you. How do you know you're finished?
I mean, deadlines are very helpful. So Kathy emphasized, you know, finishing. There is a certain point where you just have to let go, because I'm definitely the kind of writer. I'm also, big perfectionist, and I can just tweak and tinker endlessly. And I remember with my first book, I was showing you know, slightly different versions of the same poem to writer friends, where it's like, and I mean, Elizabeth, when you mentioned earlier, the spending hours on like 3 sentences, I mean, I find that like immensely pleasurable, a masochistic kind of pleasure, and I recognize the masochism behind it too. And so you need like someone else, I think, to just tell you to stop. I get to that point where I'm looking at, you know, there's a comma here. Maybe I'll make it a semicolon. Maybe it's a dash. Maybe it's 2 sentences. Maybe I just cut that sentence. And when I start to get to that point, I'm recognizing like I'm just sort of spinning my wheels, and it is like done, you know, as done as it can be. And that the writer that I am, like that's going to continue to evolve. You know, like there are things I would do differently now, looking back on my first book, of course. But I try to look at it as like a time capsule, you know, like that's a record of who I was, the writer that I was, and how I would write these poems now would be very different anyway. So, you know, there's no point in looking back in that way. So I try to take a more pragmatic look at it. Like it's out. Yeah.
I love that that idea, that image of it's a time capsule. So you're just going back and you're capturing that moment of yourself as a writer. And, you know, today would be a different time capsule if you dropped something in. Elizabeth, how do you know you're finished? And also you teach a lot of writers who are probably wrestling with that question too, as they're putting their work together and workshopping it and sharing it with you. So I don't know if the answer is different, how you know you're finished and the way that you help writers, younger writers, understand how they're finished. But how would you answer that one?
Well, similarly, I often need somebody to slap it out of my hands and say, stop. I guess I'm not a perfectionist in that I feel doomed to fail. And the idea of perfection seems impossible to me. So that often I know I'm done with something when I hate it so thoroughly that I cannot imagine working on it for a second more. This is very similar to Kathy talking about having those moments of like, I'm a genius. No, I'm terrible. Like my genius moments are all at the beginning of a project, and my this is terrible and a failure are all at the end of a project. And for my first novel, I kind of didn't want to publish it when I was done with it because I hated it so much. And that's gotten a little better for me, that I've sort of like, well, it's probably not the worst novel that's going to be published this year. It's okay. It can go out into the world. Having that, when I teach, I talk to students a lot about how they have to figure out how to harness their own self-loathing to get anything done, and to know that it exists, and that and sometimes they're going to hate their own work, and sometimes they're going to be able to work through it, and sometimes they won't. They're going to have to walk away for a little while, or read something that gives them pleasure, or remember that they know a lot of writers who feel the same way about their work, so that it's probably not true about theirs. And I do think my big feeling about writing is that it all comes down to being willing to work, and that the people who have been teaching for more than 30 years now, and the people who are successful continually, are the ones who know how to keep working even when it's aggravating and feels terrible, or even when other people are saying, this book is great, I don't think you need to work on it more, and they hear something, actually, you know what, this one story is just not up to the same level, I want to try to get it better. And then I do have to rely on readers to read my work to say, yeah, no, this is you can stop. It's like the guy who puts the cloak on James Brown. I like to think about James Brown at the end of a project and how he was always like tearing back onto stage. But you know, at some point you need to let somebody put the cloak on you and then lead you off stage. You just stop.
That is wonderful. I also envision your agent calling you and just saying, so do you really hate it? Like, do you really hate it yet? Because we got to move. Do you hate it? Yes, I hate it enough. It's ready. That's great. Thank you. Kathy, what about you? How do you know when you're finished?
Well, as you know, as the writer of only one book, I knew I was finished because thank God I had a deadline, and also because like I was really focused on the end. Like, to me, that like, not like, how did I end? The end was just driving me crazy, and I was like almost dreading getting there because I had no idea how it was going to end, and I didn't want to get to the end because I knew I had no idea, and what the hell was it going to be, and how do you do it? And so I think that's when I knew I was finished, when I felt like, number one, I've done the best I can do. I've done the best I can do. And, you know, that's before all that revising stuff happened. So,
well, let me ask you this, because I'm really curious. And I think that it would be interesting to hear, and maybe I'm just being very naive about that process, but when did you know you were done with a song in the songwriting?
When I'm happy with it, when I think it's not, because I mean, I might change with a song, until you record it, it's just you can change it. Oh, I think this line could be better. You know,
Right.
the song Vacation, right before we recorded it, we changed the first line, and so that's a little bit more flexible and fluid until you record it. And even after you record it, you can play it live and change it and change the arrangement. Not with a book, it's forever. And so that's a little bit more daunting. You
Yeah.
don't get to change it. So yeah, it was, I feel like I could have, if I'd had another 2 years, I probably could have made it a better book, but
It's a
I
great
didn't have
book.
2 years.
It's a
Thank
great
you.
book.
I mean, I don't know, when you have to like read it over and over and go revise and all that stuff, and you're not like starting from scratch, and just throwing whole books, like people that can just write a manuscript and then toss it and start over. I could never do that. I don't know. I could never do that.
Well, I think that this is probably a good place to end, because I don't want to take up too much more of your time. I really appreciate the three of you being here. I want to remind everybody that the most recent books, I'll say, All I Ever Wanted, Kathy's wonderful, wonderful memoir. Are you going to hold it up for us? I hope you are. There you go. Bullaway, Elizabeth's most recent novel. And then Chen Chen, I'm going to throw out for the When I Grow Up, I Want to Be a List of Further Possibilities, because I want to say it again many times, but I know that you have other projects also that have come since that wonderful, wonderful collection. But I encourage you all to go out and check out their books. And I can't thank you enough. This has really been a real great way, I think, for us to sort of put the cherry on the top of our ice cream sundae. I'm going to take it all the way home of this unconference. So thank you. And thank you to everyone who's watching. Thank you for being here. Thank you again to our wonderful attendees, our staff, our board of directors, and I hope everyone has a great rest of the weekend. Yeah. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks.
Take care.
Everyone for coming.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.